The bride never arrived. 200 guests murmuring, an empty altar, a humiliated man in a wheelchair. And then he looked at the employee serving water and whispered, "Please, pretend to be my fiancé today." The wedding music had been playing on a loop for too long, far too long. The string quartet didn't dare to stop. No one had the courage to give them the signal, and the violin's screech repeated over the white chairs like a broken clock. Sebastian Miller heard it all from the center of the altar. Every measure, every nervous clearing of a throat, every murmur that spread through the garden like smoke among the 200 guests who had come to see him marry. He gripped the arms of his wheelchair until his knuckles turned white. It had been quite a while since the bride should have entered. The stone path remained empty. The freshly ironed carpet on the lawn of Magnolia Manor remained untrodden. The floral arch, taller than a man, held white roses that were already beginning to wilt under the coastal sun. Rebecca Hayes wasn't appearing, and from the look on Thomas Green's face as he approached from the side, she never would. Thomas had been his lawyer his whole life, the only man in the world Sebastian trusted implicitly. He leaned behind the chair with a cell phone in his hand and a face as pale as a sheet. "Sebastian, son," he murmured, so close his words almost brushed his ear. "You need to hear this, but please breathe first." Sebastian took the device with a pulse he didn't recognize as his own. He pressed the button, the voice that came from the small speaker. It wasn't the sweet voice he had grown to love over the past year and a half. It was a voice he had never heard from that woman before. Hollow, cold, terribly polite. "Sebastian, I can't do it. Don't wait for me at the altar. I tried, I swear I tried, but when I woke up today, I understood. I wasn't born to push a wheelchair for the rest of my life. I'm not that woman, and you don't deserve someone who lies by saying yes. Goodbye." The message cut off. Silence fell on Sebastian's shoulders with the weight of a quarry stone. Behind him, the string quartet kept playing. "Tell them to stop," Sebastian asked, not recognizing his own voice. Thomas raised his hand. The violinist understood. The music died abruptly, and then, without the music, the murmuring of the guests grew unbearable. It was as if everyone had been waiting for that silence to start talking. What happened? Did she leave him? Poor man. "I told my husband. That girl never." The words reached Sebastian from all sides, crossing the garden like arrows. Poor. That word, the word he had learned to hate more than any other. The word people had started using when they looked at him since that afternoon, years ago, when a truck with failed brakes had left him seated in that chair forever. He, who had built the Miller Magnolia Hotels chain from a single inn inherited from his grandmother Eleanor, multiplying it along the entire coast until it became an empire. He, who had signed million-dollar contracts without his hand trembling. He, who had learned to live from a wheelchair with a straight back, asking nothing from anyone. He was now a poor man. He closed his eyes for a second. When he opened them, he saw her. Clara Ramirez stood at the edge of the garden next to an appetizer table with a tray of water glasses in her hands. She was very still, too still, for someone who had just heard that message bounce among the guests, like a stone in a church. She had worked at Magnolia Manor for a few years. He knew her by sight, a young, quiet woman who moved through the halls as if she didn't want to disturb the air, and yet she was the only person in that house who had never looked at him with pity. When Sebastian returned from the rehabilitation clinic after the accident, all the staff at the manor had learned the same gesture, lowering their gaze, smiling that tight smile well-intentioned people give to the sick. Everyone except her. Clara looked him in the eyes. She would say, "Good morning, Mr. Miller," as if he was still a man and not a case. She would place his coffee cup always in the exact same spot where his hand could reach it without stretching. She would change the wilted flowers in the study without him having to ask. Small gestures, so small that he himself hadn't realized he had memorized them. There are people who spend their whole lives near you without you noticing them, and one day, they are the only ones still there when everything else falls apart. Clara was at the edge of the garden with the tray of glasses and looked at him, not with pity, but with something older, something akin to understanding. "Thomas," Sebastian said without taking his eyes off her. "Come here." The lawyer leaned in again. "I need that woman here now, without a scene. Bring Clara, the one from the staff, the one who serves coffee in the morning." Thomas didn't ask. In a lifetime of serving that family, he had learned never to ask when the boss spoke in that voice. He walked along the side of the chairs, dodging glances that now made no pretense, and approached Clara. He spoke with her for a few seconds. Sebastian saw her mouth open in surprise, how she carefully placed the tray on the table with a deliberation unsuited to the moment, how she dried her hands on her apron with a minimal tremor that only someone who knew her well might have noticed. and then she walked towards him. The murmur of the crowd died down, rose, then died down again. Some guests stood up from their chairs to see better. Mr. Arthur Hayes, father of the absent bride, crossed his arms at the side of the garden, his face hardened like marble. Mrs. Margaret Olson, the head housekeeper of the manor, stood paralyzed in the staff line, a handkerchief halfway to her eye. Clara stood before the wheelchair. She didn't sit, didn't lean in, but remained standing, straight, with her hands clasped in front, waiting. Sebastian raised a hand and, with a calm he didn't feel inside, placed it over hers. The entire crowd held its breath. "Clara," he said in a voice so low only she could hear him, "I'm going to ask you for something impossible. I'm asking as a man, not as your employer. If you say no, tomorrow you'll keep your job, I'll raise your salary, and no one will ever know what I asked. I promise you, on my grandmother's memory. But if you say yes, you'll save my life." She didn't move, just looked at him. "Pretend to be my fiancé today, just today. Let all these people think the bride who left was a mistake, a confusion, and that you are the one I was truly going to marry. You don't have to sign anything, you don't have to get married, just hold my hand in front of them until the last guest leaves the garden. I beg you, Clara." He saw her eyes well up. He didn't know if it was from horror, sorrow, or fury. He waited, and then, from the side of the garden, Mr. Arthur's voice cut through the air like a kitchen knife. "This is a farce," he shouted, walking towards the altar with long strides. "That woman is an employee of the house. I've seen her mop the floor of this very room. Sebastian, for God's sake, don't humiliate yourself more than you already have been." Mrs. Olson let out a muffled gasp. A guest in the front row, an older woman with a pearl necklace, brought a hand to her chest. Another guest, a man from the Miller Magnolia Hotel's board of directors, rose from his chair, his face contorted. A photographer, who had put away his camera, took it out again. Heads turned all at once like a field of sunflowers. Clara didn't withdraw her hand. She straightened slowly, looking first at Sebastian, then at the man who was shouting her status from across the garden. And then, to the surprise of everyone present, including Sebastian, who expected her to run off with the tray in her hand, she spoke in a calm voice, so calm that the entire garden heard her without her having to raise it. "My name is Clara Ramirez." She paused, holding Mr. Arthur's gaze. "And if Mr. Miller chose me at this moment, I am the one who has to answer him. Not you, sir." A murmur ran through the chairs like a gust of wind. "An employee of the house," Mr. Arthur repeated with that short laugh polite people use to offend without seeming rude. "A maid? Do you know who the family you're talking about is, young lady?" "I know exactly who they are," Clara replied, and something in the way she said it made Mr. Arthur very still. Something in her eyes, something in the way she pronounced those 4 words, made that powerful man, with his patriarchal bearing and his marble hall accent, lose color for a second. Sebastian looked at her. There was a fraction of an instant when he saw a woman he had never known in that manner, not the one who served coffee, but another, older, vaster. Something in Clara's shoulders straightened, as if she had been waiting for this very moment for years. She lowered her gaze to him, squeezed his hand, and in front of everyone, in front of the 200 guests, of the photographers now firing in bursts, of the absent bride's father, of Mrs. Olson, who was now openly crying, of the string quartet frozen on the side, of the coastal sun that was beginning to set, Clara Ramirez said loudly and clearly, "Yes." The entire garden was breathless for an instant. Then a confused, hesitant applause began, someone unsure if it was the correct applause. Another followed, then another, until the sound of palms became a clumsy, moved river, mixed with nervous laughter, and some guests who didn't know if they were witnessing the end of a scandal or the beginning of something much bigger. Sebastian closed his eyes. For the first time in a long time, he felt he could breathe again. He squeezed Clara's hand like a shipwrecked person touching land after hours in the open sea. And then, while the photographers continued to shoot and the still stunned guests began to applaud louder, Clara leaned into his ear. She did it with a serene smile for the cameras, but the words she whispered, no one else heard. "I accept, Mr. Miller, but there's something you need to know about Rebecca Hayes. Something I discovered some time ago while cleaning a room in this house. Something for which she was never going to reach the altar today, nor any other day with you. When you find out, you'll wish you had married her without ever knowing." Sebastian opened his eyes. Clara's smile didn't fade for a second, but her gaze also didn't leave his. And as the applause grew, as Mr. Arthur turned on his heel and left the garden with firm steps, as Thomas bit his lip, Not understanding what had just happened exactly before his eyes, Sebastian understood for the first time on that endless day that the empty altar was not the end of anything. It was just the beginning. The last guest left Magnolia Manor as the sun began to set over the red tile roofs. Sebastian watched him leave from the study window, his grandmother's silver locket clutched between his fingers. It was an old habit. Whenever he felt the ground shifting beneath his feet, he would take the locket from his pocket and press the engraving into his palm until the design left a small mark on his skin. It was his way of reminding himself that he was still alive. Behind him, Thomas Green finished locking the door with 2 turns of the key. "I dismissed the quartet, dismissed the minister, dismissed the photographer," the lawyer said in his tired voice, the voice of a man no longer surprised by anything. "Tomorrow it will be on every news channel along the coast. Tomorrow by noon, I assure you, some online portal will have a photo of that girl holding your hand in front of the altar. I already know." "No, Sebastian, you don't." Thomas dropped his briefcase onto the desk. "Tomorrow at the board meeting, someone will use this scandal to ask for your replacement, and they'll have half the votes." Sebastian didn't respond. He kept looking out the window. In the garden, the white chairs lay scattered as if a storm had passed through. The employees were silently gathering them, and in the background, by the side door of the service hall, Clara stood, hands clasped in front, waiting to be called. She had been waiting for quite a while, without moving, without asking, without going to get anything to eat or drink, just standing, with a straight back and downcast eyes, like a woman who knows how to wait. "Send her in," Sebastian said. Thomas hesitated. "Sebastian, you know perfectly well what this woman said in the garden. Something she discovered cleaning a room in this house. I need to be present when we talk about that. As your lawyer, I cannot allow. Send her in alone." "Sebastian, alone." "Thomas." The lawyer clenched his jaw, but he had known that man since Sebastian was a skinny boy studying accounting from books inherited from his grandmother. He knew when to argue and when to be silent. He picked up his briefcase, opened the study door, and left. His footsteps echoed hollowly down the hallway. Clara entered a moment later. She closed the door behind her with the care of someone who had spent years learning not to make noise in other people's rooms. She walked to the center of the study. She stopped at an exact distance, neither too close nor too far, and only then did she raise her gaze. Sebastian turned his wheelchair to face her. For an instant, neither of them said anything. The afternoon light fell obliquely across the desk, casting a long shadow of the locket over the papers. Outside, someone was dragging a chair across the lawn. "Please, sit," he said. She shook her head, slowly. "If I sit, Mr. Miller, I'm going to start crying, and I don't want to cry in front of you today." Sebastian let a second pass. Then he nodded. "Then stay standing, but stay." There was another silence. A different silence from the first. A silence no longer filled with the garden, nor guests, nor cameras. It was the silence of 2 people who had suddenly been left alone in a room with something enormous between them. "Clara, before we talk about what you whispered in my ear," Sebastian began, weighing each word, "I want you to hear something. What happened out there wasn't fair to you. I put you in a situation no woman should have to endure. I used you as a shield in front of 200 people, and for that, first and foremost, I apologize." From man to woman, she blinked. She hadn't expected that. She probably expected a boss giving orders. She probably expected an envelope of money on the desk. She probably expected to be told exactly how many days she had to keep lying, and when she could return to her uniform. She didn't expect an apology. "Mr. Miller, Sebastian, inside this room, I'm Sebastian." She swallowed. She clasped her hands together, but her voice didn't tremble when she spoke. "You don't have to apologize. I said yes because I wanted to. No one forced me to do anything, and that's important for you to know before anything else. I am not a woman who says yes out of fear. I said it because while you were speaking, I saw something in your eyes that I had seen before in someone else." "In whom?" She looked away towards the window. "In my husband, the night before he died in that factory." Sebastian felt something stir in his chest. That wasn't in any employee report. He had never looked at the personnel files of his household staff. For him, until today, Clara had been a discreet shadow among the furniture. "I thought you were a single woman." "Yes, most people do." A small smile, without bitterness. "I've been a widow for years. My husband worked at a furniture factory called Coastal Woods, an old machine that wasn't maintained. There was an accident. He managed to push away a younger colleague who was with him. That's why they brought him back as a hero. That's why they signed me up for a paltry pension, because he was a dead hero, not a dead worker. Her voice trembled for the first time. She controlled it immediately. My mother has been sick with heart trouble for a long time. My younger sister still goes to school and wants to be a doctor. I am the only person bringing money into that house. That's why, when you offered me the position at the manor a few years ago, I didn't ask about the salary. I accepted. Sebastian closed his eyes for an instant. He remembered the day. Mrs. Margaret Olson had recommended her. A quiet girl, the housekeeper had said. A girl who won't give us headaches. And he had signed the contract without lifting his head from the papers. Clara, why did you never complain? I've increased staff salaries twice since you arrived, but you never asked for an extra penny, no extra leave, nothing. Because I wasn't there to complain, Mr. Sebastian. I was there to support my family, and because this manor was also the closest thing to a rest I'd had in many years. Sebastian looked at her. He truly looked at her for the first time and realized that this woman wasn't just the one who served coffee in the morning, or the one who changed the flowers in the study. She was a woman who had learned to carry the whole world on her shoulders without asking for applause. I want to propose a deal to you, he said. She looked up again. Tomorrow at noon, my board of directors will try to remove me from control of Miller Magnolia Hotels. The chain has 15 hotels on the coast, 2 inland, and is worth more than you or I can count. If they bring me down, they also bring down the work of my grandmother Eleanor, who is hospitalized at St. Jude's Hospital and whose heart cannot withstand another upset. He paused to catch his breath. Talking about his grandmother still took a physical toll. The only way to stop them is for me to have what a boss calls personal stability. In plain words, for me to appear with a woman on my arm, for that woman to sit in the front row of the next Vista Grand charity gala, to attend the annual board dinner, to visit my grandmother in the hospital, and for my grandmother to know her. For today's photos not to be of a humiliated man, but of a man who changed women at the last second and chose well. Mr. Sebastian, I don't know how to walk at a charity gala. I serve water at those galas. I don't sit at the table. That's why I chose you. He twirled the locket between his fingers. People who serve water at a gala see things people sitting at the table don't, and I need a woman who sees, not a woman who poses. Clara remained very silent. The deal is this, he continued, for a period, no longer than strictly necessary to neutralize the board. You will appear by my side at public events. You will live during that period in the guest wing of the manor, not in the staff quarters. You will learn what you need to learn. Thomas will take care of that. I, in return, will cancel your mother's house debt with the bank. I will cover your mother's cardiac treatment with the best medical team, and I will pay for your sister Lucy's complete medical career at the university of her choice, down to the last book. Clara put a hand to her mouth. It's too much. It's not. You saved me today in front of 200 people and in front of my own board of directors. I am putting a price on something priceless, and even so, I am paying you less than you are worth. Do you accept? There was a long silence. Clara looked down at the locket in his hand. Then she raised her gaze to his eyes and responded with the same calm with which she had responded in the garden. I accept, but with 2 conditions. Tell them. First, when this is over, whatever the end, I go back to my house. I don't want to stay here. I didn't come to this manor looking for a husband. I came to work. Sebastian nodded. Done. Second. During this time we are together. You do not touch me. Not for photos. Not in front of people. Not in private. My hand on yours. Yes. Yours on mine. Yes. We already accepted that today at the altar. But nothing more. I am not a woman for quick adornments. I did not come into this world to be one. Sebastian looked at her for a few long seconds and then, slowly, with an almost solemn seriousness, replied, Done. I give you my word on my grandmother's memory. She breathed deeply. It seemed as if an enormous weight had fallen from her shoulders. So, we agree? We agree, he repeated, and for an instant, he smiled at her. It was a small, rusty smile, a smile he hadn't used in a long time. Something shifted in Clara's face when she saw it, but then she straightened, walked to the desk, placed her palms on the dark wood, and looked at him with a different expression, an expression not of the deal, but of what she had promised to tell him in his ear at the altar. Sebastian, before we go, forward with this, there's something you need to hear. I won't live under this roof, not even fictitiously, without having told you. Speak. A few months ago, I was cleaning the guest room in the West Wing. Miss Rebecca would stay there when she came for weekends. That afternoon she had left early. I was vacuuming the carpet under the bed when I hit a shoebox with the vacuum cleaner that was under the mattress. She paused, swallowed. The box opened, papers fell out. I was going to put them away without looking, but as I picked them up, I saw a word, a name, the name of your company, Sebastian, Miller Magnolia Hotels, and next to it, a signature I knew from hearing the name in this house, the signature of her father, Mr. Arthur Hayes. Sebastian felt the locket turn cold in his hand. What did those papers say, Clara? She looked at him and replied in a voice so low he had to lean forward to hear her. I'm not a schooled woman to understand company papers, Sebastian, but I read enough to understand one thing. In that box were documents signed by Mr. Arthur, discussing when this chain of yours was going to be sold, as if it were a done deal. And the sale date was after your wedding date with Rebecca. There was an icy silence in the study. I dare say, Clara finished, her voice still low, that Miss Rebecca didn't leave you today because you're in a chair. That message was a lie, Sebastian. They left you today because they had already signed the day your company would no longer be yours, and it was a day when you were already supposed to be married to her. Outside, the last employee finished dragging the last chair. Inside, Sebastian clenched his fist over the locket until the engraving hurt his palm. Through the window, the garden's shadow was already lengthening on the study wall, and Sebastian understood for the second time that day that the empty altar had not been the end of anything. It was just the first move in a war he hadn't even known he was fighting 5 hours earlier. Several days had passed since the afternoon of the empty altar. Magnolia Manor looked the same as always from the outside. Gardeners pruned the rose bushes. The white gate opened and closed with its usual creak. The curtains in the main dining room swayed with the sea breeze. But inside, something had shifted, like when a painting hangs crooked on the wall and no one notices until the light changes hour and the shadow reveals the tilt. Clara Ramirez was in the guest wing next to the dresser when that shadow became visible. She held her mother's notebook in her hands. It was a worn notebook bound in dark leather, its corners bent from years of handling. Her mother had filled it with recipes, with poems written in pencil, with shopping lists from months when money barely stretched to beans and tortillas. Clara opened it to the last page. The back cover was lined with brown paper. She ran her fingertip over a disguised seam. Inside, folded with a patience not learned in any school, were the papers she had found months ago, under Rebecca Hayes's mattress. Clara, dear, the voice came from the door. Clara closed the notebook with a natural movement and placed it on the dresser. Mrs. Margaret Olson entered with a dress in one hand and a shoebox in the other. The housekeeper had served that manor for 30 years. She had ironed handkerchiefs for Mrs. Eleanor Miller when the grandmother still walked the halls. She had watched Sebastian grow up from a child. She had that domestic authority that old houses grant to those who have long swept their corners. I brought what we'll wear tonight, for the gala. I'll help you with your hair. I can manage myself, Mrs. Olson, don't worry. Are you a little nervous? It's the first time I've entered one of those places through the front door. Margaret observed her with a warm smile. Clara, dear, I know what happened. The other afternoon was very strange, but between you and me, has Mr. Miller talked to you about anything else? About the Hayes family? About papers, about the company, about some private matter? Clara didn't lift her gaze from the dress. Mr. Miller has only spoken to me about the gala, Mrs. Olson. He says I just have to smile and let Thomas answer the questions. Well. Margaret stayed a moment longer than necessary by the dresser. Her eyes rested almost unintentionally on the worn notebook. Is that your mother's notebook? Yes, ma'am. How nice to keep things from those who leave us. Margaret caressed her arm with the same tenderness one gives a dog that has just been poisoned. I'll leave you the dress. They'll be down in an hour. When the housekeeper closed the door, Clara remained very still, picked up the notebook again, slid it into her small purse, and promised herself that notebook would not be left alone in that room for another minute. It was then that there was another knock on the door, this time with a different sound, softer, with knuckles. Come in. Sebastian Miller entered in his wheelchair, closing the door with his hand without asking for help. He wore his silver locket out of his pocket, clasped against his palm. Clara, he said in a low voice that was not the boss's voice, before we go down tonight, I want you to tell me one more thing. When you found those papers months ago, why didn't you come directly to me? She looked at him for a long time and then she told him that she had gone down the stairs of the West Wing with the papers trembling under her apron, that she had found Mrs. Olson in the laundry room, that she had told her, word for word, what she saw, that Margaret had looked at her with that same warm smile she had just shown her a moment ago, and had replied, Miss Rebecca is family. Clara, don't get involved in what doesn't concern you and forget about those papers. Anyone who goes poking around in other people's rooms won't find work in any house on the coast. Sebastian closed his eyes so slowly it was barely noticeable. When he opened them, the locket had left a red mark on his palm. "Margaret has been with us for 30 years, he said, almost to himself. "My grandmother called her her daughter when she saw her. That's why, Sebastian, I kept the papers. I had no way to prove anything. I had no one to tell. The only thing I could do was wait and pray for the day someone would ask me." Sebastian took a deep breath. "Today someone asked you. Today someone asked me." They went down shortly after. Thomas Green waited for them at the wheel. The road to the Vista Grand Convention Center climbed the hill between palm trees bent by the sea wind. Inside the car, no one spoke for a long time. At some point, Clara noticed that the locket was slipping from Sebastian's pocket. She reached out her hand, and without asking permission, adjusted it. He looked at her. She held his gaze for an instant. It wasn't a gesture between lovers. It was a gesture of a sister, a mother, something older than a man and a woman in a car. Thomas looked at them in the rearview mirror and gripped the steering wheel. The Vista Grand appeared at the top, its white columns illuminated. Cameras crowded the main entrance. Thomas rolled down the car window. "The wheelchair ramp is on the side," the guard said without looking up. Through the service door. Sebastian remained silent. Clara pressed her lips together. A poorly made ramp is like a poorly chosen word. It reveals the person who built it. And that ramp in a hall where an entrance cost what a family earned in half a year led directly to the service door, as if a man in a wheelchair and a waiter with a tray were the same thing. Margaret had told Clara to enter through the main door, to let herself be photographed briefly alone before entering. Clara didn't. She walked beside Sebastian to the service door. She crossed through the Vista Grand's kitchen with him, among waiters who looked at her without saying anything and among cooks who lowered their heads. They arrived at the main hall from the side, together. Inside, the lights were warm, the glasses clinked. Mr. Arthur Hayes was in the back by a column with his wife, Mrs. Beatrice Hayes, a tall, silent woman who had spent years learning to observe without speaking. Rebecca was not there. Clara searched for her with her eyes but didn't find her at any table. Mr. Arthur, however, raised his glass to her with a smile that was anything but cordial. Sebastian introduced her one by one. "My fiancée, Clara Ramirez." Some offered their hands with polite coolness, others with genuine curiosity. Clara responded with simple words. She didn't try to imitate the elegant accent of that room. She didn't apologize for her own. She spoke as she always did. And then, by a side table, an elderly woman with a pearl necklace took her arm. "My name is Eleanor Ellie Stone. I knew Eleanor Miller when we were young." Her voice trembled for an instant. "She would have liked to have met you, dear. And believe me, I don't say that to just anyone." Clara lowered her gaze and kissed the elderly woman's hand. It was an ancient gesture, almost forgotten, but it came from the soul. Mrs. Stone had to take a handkerchief from her purse. Several ladies at the table watched the scene in silence. Something shifted in that room that night. Something no photograph could capture, but which all the matriarchs present felt. Clara was not an intruder. She was something else. Something that reminded them of their own mothers, their own grandmothers. Something true in a room full of polished things. Mr. Arthur noticed it, and that's why, before dessert, he approached Clara and asked for a word with her alone on the balcony. They went out to the balcony. The sea breeze moved the potted plants. Arthur leaned on the marble balustrade with studied elegance. "My dear, I won't waste your time. I know your mother's name, Maria Ramirez. I know she's on the waiting list at St. Jude's Hospital for a heart valve. I know your younger sister, Lucy, dreams of entering medical school and won't get in without a scholarship." He smiled, showing perfectly white teeth. "I'm a man with many friends in many places. A word from me, my dear, and a waiting list can become much longer than your dear mother's heart has time for." Clara didn't move, didn't lower her gaze, didn't raise her voice. She let him finish, and when he fell silent, she spoke with a calm that the entire balcony seemed to hear. "Mr. Hayes, my mother got on that list because her heart grew tired of enduring everything life threw at her. Not because of you, and she will leave that list when it's her turn. Not because you decide it. I wash dishes, sir. I don't wash consciences. Yours, you wash yourself." Then she gave him a small, almost courtly bow, and went back inside. Mr. Arthur remained alone on the balcony, his glass trembling in his hand. In the car on the way back, Sebastian spoke for the first time in a long while. "Clara, what you said on the balcony, I heard it all. Thomas put a small recorder in your purse. For safety. I'll forgive him if you forgive me." She smiled tiredly towards the window. "Well done." Thomas cleared his throat at the wheel. "Sebastian, is there anything else? While you two were inside, I received a call from the manor's security staff. The camera in the guest wing recorded someone entering Miss Clara's room during the gala. They were there for about 20 minutes. They checked every drawer, lifted the mattress, searched everywhere. Clara's blood ran cold until she remembered. She smiled. "Who, Thomas?" Sebastian asked. Thomas looked at her in the rearview mirror before answering. "Mrs. Margaret Olsen." Sebastian clenched his fists over the locket. 30 years. 30 years of service. The woman, his grandmother Eleanor, called her daughter. The traitor lived within the very walls of the manor. Clara opened her purse, took out the worn, dark leather notebook, and placed it on her lap. "She won't find anything in my room," she said in a calm voice. "My mother's notebook goes with me everywhere. Where I go, it goes." Sebastian looked at her, and for the first time since the accident that had left him in that chair, since the morning of the empty altar, since the day they told him, poor man, for the first time in his life, he let out a brief, genuine laugh, like a man who can breathe again. The car climbed the last curve of the hill towards Magnolia Manor. The gate lights appeared at the end of the road, and then Thomas braked sharply. At the manor gate, under the yellow light of the entrance lamp, a figure was waiting, dressed in a long coat, standing alone, with no car on the road, as if she had walked from hell. Rebecca Hayes had returned and was waiting for them. Rebecca Hayes stood under the yellow lamp of Magnolia Manor's gate in a long coat that seemed not to warm her. Her hair was hastily tied back, her lips were chapped, and a small leather purse lay by her feet, as if she had walked a long way to get there. And above all, she had a face Sebastian Miller had never seen before, in all the time he had thought he knew her. She had the face of a frightened woman. Thomas Green turned off the car engine. No one spoke inside the vehicle for several seconds. The silver locket remained clutched in Sebastian's palm. Clara Ramirez in the back seat held her mother's worn notebook against her chest like a shield. "Thomas," Sebastian said in a low voice, "lower the electric gate. Don't let her onto the property. I'll talk to her from here, Sebastian." "From here, Thomas." The lawyer obeyed. They got out of the car. Clara stayed 2 steps behind. Sebastian moved his wheelchair until he stopped in front of the closed gate. Rebecca was on the other side, separated from him by the wrought iron fence. "Sebastian," Rebecca said. Her voice trembled. "I need to talk to you, please. I have nowhere else to go tonight." "You sent an audio saying you didn't want to push my chair," he replied without raising his tone. "This is my chair. I came in it." "Speak." Rebecca closed her eyes for an instant. When she opened them, they were full of tears. And it was then, exactly in that instant, that Sebastian understood something the locket had been shouting at him for days. He had lived for years with this woman, had planned a wedding with her, and had never learned to distinguish her true tears from her rehearsed ones. But Clara, who had barely seen her pass twice through the manor halls, knew, without moving, without saying anything, what he took years to suspect. "Those tears are the kind that serve a purpose," Clara murmured, almost without opening her lips. Thomas also noticed it, clenched his jaw, and took a step back, so his small recorder hidden in the inner pocket of his jacket was pointing towards Rebecca's voice. "Sebastian, my father forced me to leave that morning," Rebecca said from the other side of the gate. "It wasn't me. I love you. I was going to marry you, but he threatened me. He told me that if I entered the garden, he would disinherit me. I fled because I was scared, but now I've come to tell you everything. I've come to help you." "Help me? I know things, Sebastian. I know what my father planned against you. I know the names of the members of your board of directors who signed with him. I know the accounts where the sale money was going to go. I'll tell you everything, but you have to let me in tonight. You have to protect me. If my father finds out I'm here, this will end badly for me." There was a silence. Sebastian looked at the gate, looked at Thomas, looked at Clara, and then, with a calm he didn't recognize in himself, he spoke to Rebecca one last time in that way. "Rebecca, are you going to sleep tonight at the Sunshine Hotel downtown? Thomas will pay for your room with his card. Tomorrow at noon, you and I will meet at my lawyer's office. If what you say is true and you come with proof, I will study it. If not, you will never see me again. This is the only offer I will make you. Sebastian, please. The Sunshine Hotel is 15 minutes away. Thomas will call you a car." Thomas was already requesting it on his cell phone. Rebecca clenched her fists against the gate. For a second, Clara thought the woman was going to scream. She didn't scream. She bit her lip, picked up her small purse from the ground, and walked to the edge of the street to wait for the car, her shoulders very straight. When the car took her away, Sebastian opened his palm. The locket had left 2 red marks, one beside the other, like 2 small blows to the heart. "Thomas," he said without taking his eyes off the spot where Rebecca had been. Tonight, no regular staff sleeps at the manor. Send everyone home with a paid day off. I want the manor empty tonight. Just Clara, you, and I. And Mrs. Olson. Mrs. Olson too. Let the manor see her leave. Without a scene. Tomorrow, we'll decide what to do with her. Done. Later, in the study, Sebastian spread out the papers from Clara's worn notebook on the desk. They were just 3 typewritten pages, a sober letterhead, a recognizable signature at the bottom. Thomas read them with his glasses on the tip of his nose, reread them. Then he took off his glasses and massaged his eyes. Sebastian, this alone isn't enough to bring down Mr. Arthur. But it is enough for one thing, to ask the commercial court for an injunction to freeze the operation. If I present this first thing tomorrow, no one can sell even a chair from the Miller Magnolia Hotels chain until everything is clarified. Do it. I'll need the notebook as custody of the evidence. Clara shook her head. Not the notebook. Take the papers. The notebook stays with me. Thomas looked at her. He understood. He nodded. Done. When Thomas left the study, Sebastian and Clara were alone. Outside, a light drizzle had begun, hitting the window panes with hardly any sound. Clara, Sebastian said, tomorrow at dawn I'm going to St. Jude's Hospital. My grandmother Eleanor had a bad night, according to the message I received an hour ago. Do you want to come with me? She was surprised. Me? But your grandmother doesn't even know me. She knows you. The floor nurse showed her the photos that came out in the news from the altar. For 3 days my grandmother has been asking to talk to you. I didn't want to bring you while all this was still so raw. But today, I can't put it off any longer. If you don't want to go, it's fine, but I'm asking you. I'll go. At the first light of the next day, they set off for the hospital. The drizzle had stopped. The sky was washed clean over the coastal rooftops. St. Jude's Hospital was a 3-story building, white and austere. Mrs. Eleanor Miller's room was on the top floor, overlooking an inner courtyard with an old palm tree. When Clara pushed Sebastian's chair into the room, she stopped at the threshold. Mrs. Eleanor was a small, fragile woman, her hair tied back by a kind nurse's fingers. She had very clear blue eyes, an intravenous line in her hand, and around her neck a silver locket, exactly like her grandson's. Come closer, my child, the grandmother said. Her voice was barely a thread, but firm. Come closer without fear. Clara approached, took the elderly woman's free hand. Mrs. Eleanor held her fingers with surprising strength for a woman in her condition. I knew your mother, the grandmother suddenly said. Clara's heart skipped a beat. My mother, ma'am, Maria Ramirez? Yes. When I was young and still walking, I did social work at a sewing workshop for women from the Harborview neighborhood. Your mother was there for a while. She had the finest hands in the whole room. She sewed little flowers with a meticulousness I haven't seen in any other woman, and one day she had to leave the classes because her husband fell ill. I could never repay her for all the time she gave me. She squeezed her fingers again. I'm glad life has brought her back to me and her daughter. Clara had to bring her free hand to her mouth. Sebastian looked at his grandmother, then at Clara, then at the white ceiling, swallowing silently. There are coincidences that are not coincidences. There are lives that, without one knowing, had been weaving an encounter for decades. My child, Mrs. Eleanor said, looking her in the eyes. My grandson chose you in front of 200 people at an altar. I wasn't there, but I've lived long enough to know one thing. When a man in the worst moment of his life looks at a woman and chooses her without knowing almost anything about her, it's not because he's crazy. It's because that woman, without having said a word, had already made a home inside him. Do you understand what I'm telling you? Clara nodded without being able to speak. Take care of him, the elderly woman asked. And take care of yourself, for my grandson has no one else, and neither do you. Mrs. Eleanor then took a beige paper envelope from under her pillow. She handed it to Sebastian. This is for you, son. If everything gets more complicated, you open it. If it doesn't get complicated, you keep it and give it to your children someday. I don't know how much time I have left, but I want it in your hand before anything else. Sebastian took the envelope, kissed her forehead. Clara left them alone for a moment and went out into the hallway to breathe. In the hallway on the top floor, by the window overlooking the inner courtyard, there was a plastic companion chair. Clara sat down, pressed her mother's notebook against her lap, thought of Maria in her small house in the Harborview neighborhood. She thought of the fine sewing hands the grandmother had just spoken of. She thought of her sister Lucy sleeping in a narrow bed with a biology book open on her face. She thought of her husband, the young man who had gone to the factory one day and never returned, and unintentionally, a tear fell silently. A hand touched her shoulder. It was Thomas. He had arrived at the hospital, His face was distraught. "Clara, Sebastian is inside." "Yes, I need you to come in with me. I have to tell you both something." They returned to the room. Thomas carefully closed the door so as not to disturb the elderly woman who had fallen asleep with her hand on her chest. "Sebastian, Clara, the injunction I filed this morning was accepted. The Miller Magnolia Hotels chain is frozen for any sale operation until further judicial order." Thomas breathed. "But I didn't just come to bring that. When I left the courthouse, someone was waiting for me outside. A person who asked to speak with me at a nearby cafe. She came without a lawyer, without an escort, without anything." "Who, Thomas?" The lawyer moistened his dry lips. "Mrs. Beatrice Hayes, Mr. Arthur's wife, Rebecca's mother." Sebastian didn't move. "And what did she want?" "She wanted to tell me something, Sebastian, about the accident that left you in that chair." The silence in the room became so dense that Mrs. Eleanor's slow breathing could be heard in the bed. Clara felt the notebook trembling in her hands. Sebastian placed his palm over the locket, which now hurt not only in his palm, but inside, as if for the first time he understood what that small piece of old silver had been guarding all those years. "Thomas," he said in a voice that was no longer the boss's voice, nor the fiancé's, nor the grandson's. It was the voice of a man who suddenly understood that his entire life had been told to him backwards. "Repeat that slowly. Slowly, Thomas." Thomas breathed deeply. "That truck with failed brakes. Sebastian, the one that left you in that chair. Mrs. Beatrice says it wasn't an accident." The hospital room fell into a silence that not even Mrs. Eleanor, asleep with her hand on her chest, could fill. Sebastian Miller looked at Thomas Green like a man looks at another man who has just lit a match in a room full of old paper. "Repeat it, Thomas," he murmured, but slower. Thomas took a notebook from the inner pocket of his jacket. He opened it to a page marked with a pencil. "Mrs. Beatrice Hayes asked to meet me alone, without an escort, without a chauffeur. She arrived in a public car at the South Sands Cafe, next to the courthouse. She ordered tea, didn't drink it. She told me, word for word, the following: that the truck that crossed in front of your car on the curve leading up to the Vista Grand years ago wasn't a company truck. It was a truck rented 2 days before in the name of a man who is now dead, a driver who was paid in cash. Beatrice says she was in the room when her husband closed the deal." Sebastian closed his eyes. For an instant, the entire room shifted for him, as if the wheelchair, after years of stillness, had stumbled on an invisible step. Clara moved closer, placed a hand on his shoulder, said nothing, just left her hand there. Sebastian took a deep breath and let it be. "Thomas," he said, opening his eyes, "why did Beatrice come to tell this just today? It's been years. Why today? Because Rebecca wasn't the first fiancé, Sebastian, and because what was going to happen to you after the wedding wasn't just losing the hotel chain, it was losing much more. Speak." Thomas leaned in. His voice dropped so low that Clara had to move closer to hear him. "Mrs. Beatrice says her husband, Mr. Arthur Hayes, had signed a contract with a foreign group. He wasn't just going to sell them the chain, he was also going to have the board declare you mentally incapacitated for business after the marriage, alleging post-accident trauma and depression. Rebecca would sign as your authorized wife. They would commit you to a private psychiatric clinic inland indefinitely. The entire fortune, the chain, the manor, everything would pass to the joint management of Rebecca and her father for years." Clara brought her free hand to her lips. Sebastian began. He had to stop. It was hard to give voice to the words. "I was going to be left in a clinic for the rest of my life." "Yes," Thomas said. "Mrs. Beatrice says that was the complete plan, and she says more. She says she agreed for years, that she kept quiet, that she pretended not to hear in her own home, but that when Rebecca returned to the manor last night with the story that her father had forced her to flee, Beatrice understood one thing. Her daughter was no longer being used by Arthur. Her daughter was now becoming Arthur. And that's why, for the first time in 40 years of marriage, Beatrice took a public car without telling anyone and came to find me." Sebastian remained silent for a long while. Then, slowly, he took the beige envelope his grandmother had given him minutes before from his pocket. He squeezed it between his fingers. "My grandmother told me to open this if everything got more complicated," he murmured. "I think the time is now, Thomas." Clara wanted to withdraw. Sebastian raised his free hand and gestured for her to stay. He opened the envelope. Inside were 2 handwritten sheets in Eleanor's painstaking script. Sebastian read them in silence. His eyes welled up. He turned the first page, then the second. When he finished, he folded the pages with almost religious care and handed them to Thomas. "Read them aloud," I can't say them. Thomas read them. When he finished, he looked at Sebastian with an expression Clara had never seen on his face. Your grandmother, Thomas said. She knew years ago, Sebastian. She knew a few months after the accident. That's why she made you study commercial law. That's why she made you place the chain's assets under a structure that only you can unlock. That's why she never wanted you to marry Rebecca Hayes, even though she never told you out loud. Sebastian brought both hands to his eyes. He stayed like that for a long instant. When he lowered his hands, Clara saw a tear fall onto his pants. Just one. Sebastian, who had endured the empty altar without a public complaint, now cried silently for the small woman sleeping in that hospital bed. My grandmother protected me, he murmured. My grandmother protected me all these years, without telling me, so I wouldn't lose sleep, so I could remain a man and not a frightened one. Clara knelt beside the wheelchair. Without asking permission, she took both his hands, kissed one, then the other, just as her mother Maria had taught her to kiss the hands of elders in her Harborview neighborhood. Sebastian closed his eyes. Mrs. Eleanor in the bed sighed without waking, as if in some corner of the deep sleep she was in, she had felt the scene. They returned to Magnolia Manor at the end of the afternoon. The manor was empty, just as Sebastian had requested. Only the distant gate guard watched the entrance. Mrs. Margaret Olson had left in the morning with her paid day off, suspecting nothing. Thomas locked himself in the study with 3 folders. Clara stayed with Sebastian in the main living room, and then the doorbell rang at the gate. Thomas looked through the security camera. It's Mrs. Beatrice, he said. She asked to come this afternoon to deliver documentation. She arrived earlier than expected. Let her in. Mrs. Beatrice Hayes entered the living room with the air of a woman who no longer expects anything from life, and for that very reason has decided to tell the truth. She carried an old leather purse. Sebastian offered her a seat. Clara brought her a glass of water without anyone asking. Beatrice took the glass with hands that trembled, not from fear, but from decades of accumulated exhaustion. Sebastian, my son, she said, looking him in the eyes. I knew your grandmother when we were 2 young women at country dances. Eleanor married for love to a man who respected her until his last day. I married for convenience to a man who never respected me. That is the entire difference between your life and mine. She opened her purse, took out an envelope, then a second envelope, then a hardcover notebook held with a rubber band, and placed them one by one on the low table in the living room. This envelope has the names of the board members who accepted bribes from my husband. There are 6. 3 of them are visible leaders. The other 3 are supplementary votes. She touched the second envelope. Here are the receipts for the cash payments to the truck driver. My husband kept them for his own safety. I copied them months ago when I learned what could happen after the wedding. She touched the notebook. Here is my own handwriting. A signed and dated declaration from me. If your lawyer presents it, I will stand by it in court. I won't back down. Thomas opened the 2 folders, began comparing names. His face hardened with each page he turned. He spent 5 minutes in silence. When he finished, he looked at Sebastian. Sebastian, this is comprehensive. With this, there's not just an injunction. With this, there are criminal charges. For your board, for Mr. Arthur, and unfortunately also for Rebecca, because she signed papers knowing what she was signing. Beatrice closed her eyes. A single tear fell onto the low table. My daughter will have to answer to justice. I know, that's why I came. Sebastian looked at her. He looked at her for a long time. Mrs. Beatrice, he said slowly, I am not a judge. It's not my place to decide what happens to your daughter, but I will tell you one thing, woman to woman, with my fiancé present here. Clara looked up, surprised by the phrasing. If your daughter had entered the garden that wedding morning, she would be an even worse woman than she is today, because she would have started an entire life of lying every day by my side, until the day she decided to sign my commitment papers. The one who saved her that morning was precisely the one she despises, the employee who served the water. This woman. Clara looked down. Beatrice didn't look away. I know, son, she said in a low voice. I know. When I saw the photo of the altar on the news, when I saw Clara take your hand without even knowing who you really were, I knew that my daughter had just lost something she would never get back. The opportunity to be a good woman. There was silence. Then Beatrice did something unexpected. She stood up, walked to where Clara was sitting, took both her hands, just as Clara had taken Sebastian's hours earlier in the hospital. Your mother-in-law, Beatrice said, her voice breaking. You'll never have one, but allow me this afternoon to be, for a minute, the older woman who tells you, thank you, Clara, for supporting this man when my own were throwing him into the pit. Thank you for being what my daughter refused to be. May life repay you. I, from the shadow that remains of me, will ask for it every day." Clara bit her lip to keep from crying. She squeezed Beatrice's hands, said nothing. When Beatrice left, Thomas locked the manor gate with a double turn, returned to the living room. Sebastian continued to look at the low table with the 3 documents. "Thomas," he said, without looking up, "tomorrow at noon, Rebecca will be in your office, as per our agreement last night. I want to be there too. I want to see her face one last time. I want her to know her mother came before her." "Sebastian, you don't have to go. I can handle it. I'm going. And Clara is coming with me." Clara looked up, surprised. "Me, Sebastian? That meeting is between you two. That meeting is between the woman who almost put me in a clinic forever, and the man she thought she could send to the bottom of the pit. You're coming because you're the one who saw it before anyone else. You're coming because your word in this story now weighs more than anyone else's." Clara swallowed. "I'll go." That night, Thomas worked until dawn in the study. Sebastian slept little. Clara, in the guest wing, held her mother's leather notebook against her chest and couldn't sleep either. In her head spun the phrase Beatrice had said to her when leaving, at the door, in a voice so low that only she had heard it. "Clara, dear, be careful. When a man like my husband sees himself lost, he becomes more dangerous, not less." The next day, first thing in the morning, Thomas received a call on his cell phone that almost made him drop his coffee cup. It was the general director of St. Jude's Hospital. "Mr. Green, I need Mr. Miller to come immediately. We had a situation early this morning with Mrs. Eleanor Miller's room." Thomas felt a chill. Is she okay?" "She's fine, but someone tried to enter her room during the night, pretending to be medical staff. The night nurse discovered him in time. We called the police. The man escaped. But he left something, Mr. Green. He left something on Mrs. Eleanor's nightstand." "What did he leave?" The hospital director took a moment to respond. "A wedding invitation, Mr. Green. The original invitation to the wedding that didn't happen, and on top of it, written in red marker, a single word, next." The extraordinary meeting of the Miller Magnolia Hotel's board of directors was called for the following noon on the top floor of the corporate tower in downtown San Esteban by the sea. Thomas Green formally requested it that very morning, as soon as the call from the St. Jude's Hospital director ended. As soon as he heard the word written in red marker on Mrs. Eleanor Miller's nightstand. Sebastian Miller didn't sleep that night. Neither did Clara Ramirez. First thing that day, before leaving for the tower, she entered the manor's study with 2 cups of coffee and an old photograph in her hand. "Before we go down, Sebastian, there's something I need to show you." She placed the photograph on the desk. It was a black and white photo, worn by the years with a bent corner. In the image appeared a young man in a worker's uniform next to a small textile union flag. Behind the young man, easily recognizable even a quarter of a century younger, was Mr. Arthur Hayes. "I found this photo, along with the papers under Miss Rebecca's mattress. It was tucked inside a yellow envelope. I didn't understand what it meant then. Last night, while I couldn't sleep, I remembered the name of the union on the flag. It's a textile union my mother-in-law mentioned many times. The union my husband heard about all his life." Sebastian looked at her without blinking. "Your husband, Joe Ramirez." Clara pronounced the name as one might take a stone from the bottom of a pocket. "Joe worked all his life in furniture making, yes, but his father was a textile worker. And all the textile workers on this coast know a story that is never told aloud. Many years ago, a union leader was beaten after leaving a meeting. He was left with a leg that never worked again. The police said it was a robbery. The workers knew it wasn't. The workers knew who had sent those men, but no one had anything to prove it." Sebastian took the photograph with his free hand. The young worker in the photo is that same man. And behind him, the person the union people quietly named as responsible is Mr. Arthur. Miss Rebecca probably kept that photo without knowing everything it meant. Perhaps she found it in a box belonging to her father and put it aside because it seemed like a trophy. But on this coast, Sebastian, that photo is worth more than any company document. That photo, shown in the right place, leaves Mr. Arthur without friends. Sebastian put the photo in his briefcase along with the documents. He leaned towards Clara. He looked at her with the deep calm of a man who had just understood that the woman in front of him had been carrying keys to doors he hadn't even known existed for years. "Clara, when this is over, no matter how it ends, I need to tell you something important. But today isn't the day. Today we're going to the tower. We'll talk later. The Miller Magnolia Hotel's boardroom had a long, dark wood table that had received decisions for 30 years. The board members arrived one by one, with the feigned hurry of someone pretending not to know anything. Mr. Arthur Hayes arrived last, accompanied by his daughter Rebecca. Both came without a lawyer. It was a calculated decision. Arthur still believed, that noon, that he controlled the board. Sebastian entered, rolling his chair up the side ramp with Thomas on his left and Clara on his right. Clara didn't sit in the back. She sat next to Sebastian's seat, in the place of official companions. Mr. Arthur looked at her and smiled, that small smile polite people use to offend. "My dear," he said before the meeting began, "I see you're not serving us water today. Moving up in the world, moving up." There was a short chuckle among two board members. Clara didn't flinch. Thomas opened his briefcase, took out the two folders, took out the handwritten notebook, took out the photograph, and placed them one by one on the long table. Mrs. Eleanor Ellie Stone, an honorary board member since the time of Mrs. Eleanor Miller, leaned forward at the end of the table. She was an older woman, a woman of few words, and respected by everyone present. She had agreed to come that morning when Thomas called her at dawn. Sebastian spoke without raising his voice. He didn't raise it once in the next 20 minutes. Today this board has 3 items on the agenda. Reading of the injunction issued yesterday by the commercial court, freezing any sale operation of the chain. Reading of the names of the 6 members of this board who received cash payments from Mr. Arthur Hayes to prepare my dismissal for alleged mental incapacity based on the accident that left me in this chair, with a view to indefinite clinical confinement after my marriage. And finally, reading of the declaration signed by Mrs. Beatrice Hayes, Mr. Hayes's wife, who yesterday delivered complete documentation and pledged to uphold her declaration in court. The entire room held its breath. Mr. Arthur stood up so slowly that his legs seemed to weigh tons. "This is an outrageous slander." "Mr. Arthur," Thomas said in the neutral voice that only lawyers who have already won use when speaking to lawyers who have already lost. "I suggest you sit down. Before we continue, let's move on to the evidence appendix." Thomas placed the photograph in the center of the table. Mrs. Ellie Stone adjusted her glasses, leaned in, looked at the photo for a long moment. When she raised her eyes, they were moist. "This face," she said, looking directly at Arthur. "I know it. My brother was a textile worker in this port, Mr. Hayes. I grew up hearing a name in my house that was never said aloud. Today, finally, after many years, I put a face to that name." 3 board members pushed their chairs back, physically moving away from Arthur. It was a small gesture, but everyone in that room knew that a small gesture at a power table was worth more than a shout. Rebecca Hayes bit her lips, began to speak. I will tell my part. I will cooperate. I didn't know." "Miss Hayes," Thomas cut her off without looking at her. "You tell your part to the prosecutor's office. Here in this board meeting today, you have not been given the floor." Rebecca slumped into her chair. For the first time in her adult life, she seemed like a small woman. Sebastian raised a hand, asked for the final word. Clara looked at him. He, instead, looked at Clara. There is someone in this room who is not a board member, nor a shareholder, nor a lawyer, but who has more right than anyone to say the final words of this meeting. "Clara, if you wish, speak." Clara stood up slowly, placed her hands on the long table, just as she had placed them on the study desk that first afternoon. She looked at the 6 corrupt members, looked at Mr. Arthur, looked at Rebecca, and finally looked at Mrs. Stone, who supported her with a small nod. "My name is Clara Ramirez," she said in a firm voice. "I am a maid. I have worked for some years at Magnolia Manor. I wash dishes, serve coffee, change sheets. I never stepped foot in a business school. I never signed a $1 million contract. But there's one thing I learned carrying trays through halls like this, and today I'm going to say it in front of all of you, just once, so you remember it." She paused briefly. The entire room held its breath. People who serve water at a table, sirs, see things that people sitting at the table don't. And for years, you sat at this table believing that the people who served water didn't have eyes. Today you discover that they do. Today you also discover that those eyes have been keeping what they saw for a long time, waiting for the right day to speak. Today is that day. I didn't come to humiliate anyone. I simply came to return the gaze you never thought would be returned to you. The silence in the room became absolute. Mrs. Stone was the first to applaud. Slowly, once, again. The small applause spread to 3 board members, then to one more, until half the table applauded with a strange solemnity. Mr. Arthur Hayes left the room escorted by corporate security. Rebecca left behind him, crying openly. The 6 corrupt members signed their resignations before leaving. Thomas received them one by one with the company seal. When the room emptied, only the 3 of them remained: Sebastian, Clara, and Thomas. Mrs. Stone approached before leaving. She took Clara's hands. "Clara, dear, I have no children. My husband and I decided years ago to dedicate part of our estate to a foundation that pays university scholarships. Your sister Lucy Ramirez, if she passes her medical exam, will have her complete education paid for by the Stone Foundation from this very noon. No conditions, no signature from you, no obligation to anyone. It's my way of repaying your mother for the sewing classes my dear Eleanor never managed to pay her for." Clara brought her free hand to her mouth. She couldn't speak, just nodded, defeated by such tenderness. Mrs. Stone kissed her on the forehead like a grandmother. They returned to the manor at the end of the afternoon. On the way, Sebastian received a call from St. Jude's Hospital. It was the same director. The man's voice trembled this time for a different reason. "Mr. Miller, your grandmother, Mrs. Eleanor, woke up an hour ago. She's asking to see you and is saying something we don't quite understand. She repeats a name, Clara, and repeats a word, chapel. She wants you both to go to a chapel. That's the only thing she wants to see with her own eyes before letting go." Sebastian closed his eyes. Clara, beside him, clasped her hands over her mother's notebook. That night, in the study of Magnolia Manor, Sebastian opened for the first time a folder his lawyer had never opened in front of anyone. He searched for a name, called a person, scheduled a visit for the next morning to a small chapel surrounded by trees on the outskirts of town. It was called Our Lady of the Dew Chapel, and then, for the first time in years, he himself, with his own hand, dialed a phone number he had saved and never used. He waited for rings. When someone answered, he said only one sentence: "Mrs. Maria Ramirez, I am Sebastian Miller. I ask your permission tomorrow at dawn to pick you up from your house and drive you to a very special place. I cannot tell you more over the phone. I only ask you to trust me and to bring your youngest daughter, Lucy, too." There was a silence on the other end of the line. Then, a very small, very tired voice, very full of something Sebastian couldn't name. "I'll go, son, I'll go." Dawn on the coast arrived pale, as if the sky also knew that day would be different. Sebastian Miller left Magnolia Manor with Thomas Green at the wheel. His grandmother Eleanor's silver locket was in his chest pocket, over his heart. They picked up Mrs. Maria Ramirez from her small house in the Harborview neighborhood. The house was humble. The facade was peeling from the sea salt. Maria waited at the door with a shawl over her shoulders, leaning on Lucy Ramirez's arm. Clara's younger sister had the wide eyes of a teenager who still didn't understand what she was doing there, but who had long ago learned not to ask questions when an older sister gave instructions. Sebastian got out of the car, moved his chair to where the mother stood, took both her hands, and told her, without preamble, what he had rehearsed all night. "Mrs. Maria, many years ago, my grandmother Eleanor Miller paid you for some sewing lessons with less money than your time was worth. Today, I've come to take you to a place where my grandmother wants to apologize to you for that debt, and where your eldest daughter will also marry me in a small chapel on the outskirts if she still accepts me." Maria looked at him. Sebastian saw in those tired eyes a depth of light that the worn body had not managed to extinguish. "Son," she said slowly, "if Clara accepted you in front of 200 people, without even knowing who you really were, she will accept you today with all the lights on. Let's go." At the manor, meanwhile, Mrs. Margaret Olson was received in the study. She arrived thinking she was returning to a job she had been doing for 30 years. Upon entering, she found Clara sitting in the main armchair with the worn leather notebook resting on her lap. Margaret stood in the doorway. "Mrs. Olson," Clara said without raising her voice. "Mrs. Eleanor used to call you daughter in other times. Out of respect for that word, no one will report you to the police today. Thomas stored the guest wing camera recording in a safe. The safe will remain closed forever. But you, Mrs. Olson, from this morning onwards, will never set foot in this manor again. Your pension is deposited. Your belongings are packed. May life burden you justly and no more." Margaret opened her mouth, closed it, lowered her head, and left, escorted by the gate guard without speaking a word. When the electric gate closed behind her, Clara breathed for the first time in many months, as if the entire manor was, now, a truly habitable home. Our Lady of the Dew Chapel was at the end of a dirt road surrounded by old carob trees. It was a small, light stone building with a red tile roof that the morning sun was beginning to warm. There were no guests, no photographers, No board of directors. There were only the people who mattered. Mrs. Eleanor Miller arrived in an ambulance from St. Jude's Hospital, authorized by the director in person, accompanied by her attending nurse. They rolled a wheeled stretcher to the chapel door. They positioned it next to the altar, slightly reclined so the grandmother could see. She had very clear blue eyes. And that morning, a serene lucidity that the nurse whispered to Sebastian she might not have again. Clara entered, supported on her left arm by her mother Maria and on her right arm by her sister Lucy. She wore a simple dress, no long veil, no crown, just a sprig of jasmine from the manor garden held in her right hand. She had styled her own hair in front of the guest wing mirror that morning, with the firm hands of a woman who knows that big days are not delegated. Maria walked slowly, stopping every few steps to catch her breath. Lucy, on the other side, held her elbow with a tenderness that only younger sisters have when they suddenly understand that the older one also needs care. Sebastian waited for them at the foot of the altar. In his chair, Thomas Green served as a witness. Mrs. Ellie Stone, seated in the front pew, served as the extended family life was giving them. When Clara reached the altar, Mrs. Eleanor raised her emaciated hand and asked the priest for a moment. "Wait, Father," the grandmother said in a broken but clear voice. Before this young woman makes any vows before God, her grandmother in Christ must ask her mother for forgiveness in front of everyone. Maria Ramirez approached the stretcher. She took Eleanor's hand. "There is nothing to forgive, my lady," Maria murmured. "Those classes gave me a few rougher afternoons in a life where happy afternoons." "Our daughters," Eleanor replied in a faint voice. "Sometimes they cross paths that mothers cannot fully understand until the end. Yours and mine crossed. May the same God who brought us together late forgive us both for not having sought each other out sooner." The two older women held each other's gaze. Maria kissed Eleanor's hand. Eleanor kissed Maria's forehead, and only then could the priest continue. Sebastian took Clara's hands, said his vows slowly, looking into her eyes. He told her that he had chosen her at the worst moment of his life because that woman had already made a home inside him without him knowing it. He told her that the wheelchair was just furniture, but she was the roof. He told her that he wasn't asking her to support him, but to walk by his side, that those legs he lacked would be lent together by her steps. Clara responded with a calm that moved the nurse, Thomas, Ellie, and the priest. She told Sebastian that she had learned in the halls of that manor that being seen by one man was worth more than being desired by all others, that she brought no dowry, no family name, no estate. She brought only a worn, dark leather notebook with her mother's poems and recipes written in pencil, that notebook, from that morning onwards, would belong to both of them. When they kissed, there was no applause. There was just the small sound of the wind moving the carob tree branches and a contained sob from Maria in the front pew. Mrs. Eleanor Miller slowly closed her eyes. The nurse approached, alarmed. The grandmother opened her eyes again. "Relax, my child," she told the nurse. "I'm not leaving yet, but I wanted to see it. And I did. Now, I can rest well." Mrs. Eleanor lived several more weeks in her room at St. Jude's Hospital, receiving daily visits from Clara, who read her passages from the worn leather notebook. Maria Ramirez received a transplant at a private clinic fully covered by the Stone Foundation and recovered enough to sit in the sun on her small house's patio again by the sea salt, sowing little flowers for the granddaughter who would never arrive, but whom she continued to await with the patience of ancient mothers. Lucy Ramirez passed her medical exam with the highest score in her class. Mr. Arthur Hayes was prosecuted by justice. Mrs. Beatrice Hayes upheld her declaration until the end. Rebecca Hayes collaborated with the prosecutor's office and received a reduced sentence, far from the coast, in an inland city where no one knew her last name. Beatrice wrote Clara one letter, a single one, thanking her for being what her daughter refused to be, and asked that the letter, once read, be burned. Clara read it, burned it. Miller Magnolia Hotels reorganized with a new board. Mrs. Ellie Stone agreed to occupy the honorary seat. Eleanor left vacant. Sebastian signed contracts again without his hand trembling, but this time he signed them with Clara by his side, in an office designed so that the wheelchair and the walking woman would reach the desk at the same height. Time passed. One ordinary morning, in the garden of Magnolia Manor, Sebastian practiced with a physical therapist. He managed to stand upright, supported by parallel bars, for a few seconds. Clara watched him from the garden gate, her hand on her belly, which was already beginning to curve very slightly. She said nothing to him, just smiled. Sebastian understood. Mrs. Eleanor's silver locket ended up around Clara's neck the day the grandmother closed her eyes for the last time. One of Eleanor's handwritten letters said on its last line, "May this old silver continue to accompany the woman my grandson had the courage to choose when he was more alone than ever. The worn, dark leather notebook eventually passed into Lucy's hands. When Lucy graduated as a doctor, she kept it in her office on her desk. A patient once asked her, "What was that old notebook?" Lucy replied, looking out the window, "It's the notebook of the women in my family. Everything I am is written inside it, without any of them having written it on purpose." And on a warm afternoon, at the end of a dirt road surrounded by carob trees, Sebastian Miller pushed for the first time, taking 2 steps supported by Clara. The small car where a girl slept, who had the very clear blue eyes of a great-grandmother who was no longer there, the fine sewing hands of a grandmother who awaited her with patience, and the simple, firm name of the woman who one day served water in a garden and returned, to those who wished to humiliate her, a gaze the whole world never forgot. The girl's name was Eleanor, and the sea wind that afternoon seemed to have been waiting for that name forever.